That's the only beauty. We make another bookstore to sell it. But on behalf of MIER and also University of Malaya Press, let me welcome warmly all of you to MIER. It's our clubhouse. And this is a very nice occasion because we have all the authors here except two, and the third is supposed to be here to be the official launcher of the book. Sri Arshad Ayub is also lost his way. Okay. It's quite an experience. But how when you lost away, you come and find this place, you enjoy this atmosphere. This is a very informal thing, and we just need to launch this, to us, a great book in honor of the great man who has contributed so much to our country's development. A lot of us look back to that period and with nostalgia because we not only learned a lot, but also we were part of the process of implementing some of his ideas and in the discussions with it. We are honored to have this morning also Dr. Nizam, who is the third son of Tun Razak.
Not the first one.
Not the first one. And we have here all friends. Dato is my classmate, is president of Mubarak and former deputy prime minister. I wish you were. Menteri Besar Pahang. And that's from Tun Razak's house, degree also. So this morning is very simple procedure. I just basically introduce people around and then ask my co-author, in fact the principal author, Rasiah, to then make his summary or presentation of what the book is about, why we wrote it, and so on. And all the authors are here. Can I introduce Dr. Keok, who is from MIU. He co-authors a chapter with Dr. Selvaratnam on education policies. Rajah has had a big impact on our education policies, so it is a good and interesting chapter. Of course, Rasiah, Professor Ulong. I used to call him Professor Unggul. Distinguished professor at AEI in UM. He is, of course, the co-author and senior co-author. Professor Dato Rahman Embong also wrote the chapter on nation building in looking at the contribution of Tun Razak. Professor Khaeruddin, Sudharmin. He wrote Arshad Ayub, the chapter on the role of Mara, recently professionals, and Dr. Ikmal, a colleague from USM, now a freelancer. He wrote on the Felda, which is also a major institution created by the Nepalese. Okay, can I also introduce and recognize Professor Madhya Hafriza. He's the CEO of the Asal Jalan, which sponsors this study. I have friends, Johan is here, old colleague, a few others that we welcome you very much and hope you enjoy the discussion of this paper and hopefully you buy the book also. So it's all going to be out there. Unfortunately, the publicity and the method of selling this book has been a bit not up to the mark, basically. So it's not. We wanted to make it the top of the list for the week, right? You want at the bottom of the list. Okay. Anyway, so welcome again. I would like now to proceed. Our procedure is basically get all the starting with Rajah to talk about their chapters, their contribution, to highlight what role that Tun has played in our history, and then at the end, actually, Sri Arshad Ayub is supposed then to sort of wind up and launch the book, maybe reminiscing a bit about his experience with Tun. Anyway, let me now start with Rajah to introduce the book.
Thank you, Kamal, Datuk Nizam, Professor Frida, my fellow co-authors, and distinguished guests here, ladies and gentlemen. I must say I was fortunate that I was approached to submit a proposal, which I believe completed with a few other proposals to take on this book. And the purpose of the book was not so much writing another biography of this important Prime Minister of ours, but more so what lessons we could draw from his leadership, his role as Prime Minister, as well as the administration he led. I think that was more like it. So the proposal that we came up with, and I had to at least, of course, my mentor, that's Kamal, was extremely busy then. Fortunately for me, then he I think he became a casualty of politics, and therefore he had all the time, and therefore I was lucky that he agreed to join me. He cannot be drawn in now because you can see his picture up there, his portrait. It probably brought MIER back. Incredible at this stage, I feel MIER just running, it's not even walking. So, anyway, I'm really glad to see the role he's playing here now. But in our quest to do that, it is then that I felt this important person, citizen of Malaysia, incredibly gave leadership qualities that not only the government subsequently could have learned from, including the government now, but also I feel many leaders of many other countries, and therefore we took this very seriously, and that started the journey to produce the book. Let me mention that among the things I think the book tends to carry, and which you might find interesting, even though for some reason country Kamal said that it's not back of the list. I think it's also a lot to do with the way it was launched, given that somehow Tun Razak, the first son of Datuk Sri Najib, always there's going to be some sort of passion either in support or against the former Prime Minister. So we had to keep it low. The profile was always kept low. So I think for those reasons, the book didn't really get to the forefront. But I think if you look at it, my personal view, though I could be biased, since I played an important role with Tan Sri Kamal in editing it, apart from contributing directly to chapters. We think it's a good book. The reasons we are putting across this, we all know about the success of Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore as latecomer experiences that everybody glorifies and looks at as models for others. Here, I think, like what Perkins mentioned before, each country is unique, and in that sense, we discover that the experience that Razak brought about as Prime Minister and the administration that he led gives us a different picture, although the country is still only an upper middle income country. And for that reason, I believe Tan Sri Kamal in his chapter talks about a leadership that we did not have for long, that he had left too short, too soon. My own feeling is if we had continued with that sort of incisiveness in the way problems were resolved or how leaders were selected, I think we could have become like one of those developed countries. Although I'm not one of them in a Popperian sense, one who believes in the predictive power, as many economists like to call. If one is familiar with the poverty of historicism that Popper came up with, or even his open society and its enemies, I'm not that sort of guy who believes that he can simply look at the past and then say that the future will be this way or that way. Something can happen. But having said that, I really think that an attempt to articulate, an attempt to look at what he did breaks new ground in the way, say, many countries, for example, African countries that are parastatals, like our Khaeruddin, big organizations, semi-government bodies that sometimes called meso-organizations, the kind of role that they play, and how problems facing these organizations were resolved. Now, we identified focal areas where he contributed to. That's why we had my fellow co-authors, who are all experts in their own areas and in their own right, except for Johan and Jomo, who couldn't make it today. Both of them are not in Kuala Lumpur. I'm sure if you get to look at the book, you'll see the chapters. But on my part, I wrote a few chapters with Sri Kamal, and I did one myself, apart from putting the whole book together. Let me mention what may be important in them. The part to do with NAP, although Jomo took that, and therefore we tried to stay somehow away from the prongs that built the new economic policy. But what we thought were an attempt in the chapter to reduce poverty, also to promote incremental innovations on its part, the creation of MARDI and the whole limb, Lembaga Padi dan Beras Negara, Majuikan. These organizations were not only connecting, which we did in the next chapter, but they were also stimulating incremental innovations. And in areas where they weren't succeeding, he replaced the leaders. That's one. Second, he also delegated authority. In other words, if he found a Malaysian capable of doing, it's just like the way he appointed our IGP, Hani Homa in 1974, and delegated authority to him. I think that sort of thing, I think, will be somewhat missing. And he was fortunate to a large extent too. I must say that he had Tun Ismail Ali with him. I could see two important roles that Ismail Ali played as able civil servant of his. One is to avoid this problem of fallacy of composition. When governments, I'm not sure if you're familiar, Julius Kambarajayari once mentioned that he was able to export, Tanzanian exports of 1 ton of sisal ham could bring 1 tractor in 1960. But they had to export 5 tons in order to purchase 1 tractor in 1965. Now, he and his administration avoided this by diversifying export, to reduce the incidence of having serious balance of payment problems. The second one is to avoid the Dutch disease. I'm not sure if you're familiar. The Dutch disease really starts in Holland, in the sense that when they had oil, the appreciation in the guilder then, we have the euro now, but they had the guilder then, led to the squeezing out of manufacturing and agriculture because imports became cheap as the guilder rose in value. But the government quickly arrested that, something countries like Nigeria and so on have never managed, apart from having stupendous expenditure because they have lots of balance of payment surpluses, which obviously will have the flip side whenever prices fall. Then that was averted. We didn't have the problem that we had during Tun Mahathir's time from 1989 to 1997. Many of them mentioned that because the ringgit went up, we were very happy that we had a very strong ringgit, therefore we were a powerful economy during Tun Mahathir. We argue against that. The argument we have is the ringgit was high despite chronic balance of payment deficit. We never had a surplus from 89 to 97. Go and look up. Until the currency crashed, we never had a surplus. Yet the ringgit went up. The ringgit went up only because we had huge amounts of foreign direct investment, huge amounts of portfolio equity investment. Now, if it didn't damage the economy with 2 ringgit and 40 cents a dollar, that would have been okay. Instead, it destroyed the food industry. In fact, almost all of the inflation that was caused in 97 comes from huge food imports. We're not talking about plantations. That they did well. Now, these are things that would have been avoided during Razak's time, I must say, and the role that Tun Ismail Ali played. And this is even discussed in that chapter. The next one we dealt with is connecting farmers and fishermen with markets. I could see this when I did this report for the UNIDO. Resource-based industrialization, Timor-Leste, they made me the chief economist. 3 kilometers from Delhi, the capital, you'll find that coconut has no value, completely no value. But it would have been $5 in Delhi. 3 kilometers away, no value. And that's the sort of situation that was around here. How middlemen control the situation, something Pak Ungku articulated well in his own works. Now this again was averted, the formation of Majuikan, the formation of Lembaga Padi and Beras Negara, the formation of all sorts of other bodies that address these problems. I think Dr. Ikmal will discuss on Salih. That's on that. But also important is, when productivity didn't rise, he played a role to find out why productivity didn't rise. Leaders would change, And you eventually saw a trend rise in productivity. You look at productivity from 70 to 79, I have figures from there. And it's okay to include Tun Razak simply because he just carried out what Tun Razak did. And I must also say that he raised from less than 70% self-sufficiency paddy in 1970 to 86% in 1975, highest ever achieved by Malaysians. Of course, one can make the argument as we develop, we will have to rely on imports of those things. Taiwan has 90% self-sufficiency now, so it doesn't make any argument why we shouldn't do those things. And this was achieved during Tun Razak's time. Now, let me mention my own chapter that I did on industrialization. Some of them feel that Tun Razak was only associated with rural poverty, rural development, and so on. I too thought the same. When I was growing up, I'm number 10 or the 13 siblings. I hardly went to any primary school, completely no primary one. Still in secondary school, reading newspapers in the library, school library, I could see my prime minister as Tun Razak. So I wasn't really someone who knew Razak that well then, but it's through my own detailed research, I could see the link with export-based industrialization that he launched. In the way Arthur Lewis would have argued, how you you remove surplus labor from farms. Lots of them had to work in urban cities. It's not just urban poor that got absorbed. People from Baling, from Crow, all sorts of places went to work. That, if you see unemployment rates, the trend fall from 8% 1970. Poverty too, the reduction in unemployment also coincided with fall in poverty, apart from, of course, land development and a whole range of other things that he did. Adapting largely foreign sources of knowledge, adapting, including the type of irrigation schemes we came up with, including the double cropping that we, a lot of it actually came from importing and adapting, which I would always refer to as incremental. Now, in that sort of sense, we see that there was active participation in seeing that change was taking place. And it was reflected in increasing productivity levels. Although one may say one important problem with the LP is that if Jomo was around, he would have had to explain why the public service became dominated by just one ethnic group. But let me mention that if only we had done those things before, because I think the focus then was elevating poverty. There was no focus on participation in radical innovations. Taiwan and Korea did that right from the beginning, but since Tun Razak focuses on alleviating poverty and reducing unemployment, I think he had done that really well. We did launch such parastatals to support radical innovations from 91, but we didn't have the kind of appraisal that Tun Razak put in place. May not be formal, but in a way, action was taken to see that there was no malaise. So it is in that way that we feel, before I pass the cue to my fellow co-authors, we feel that there are important lessons to be learned, including by the current government, on how to deal with issues that actually have an impact, have implications for the people, and implications for the country's development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rahman is wrote a chapter on nation building, and last weekend, at this same time, we had a conference, a colloquium on the issue of identity, nation building, and state building. And Pastor Rahman was there. Okay, can you talk about your chapter?
Thank you, Saudara Kamal. Fellow co-writers, Datuk Nizam, my old friend, Sri Aziz, who his classmate almost promoted to Deputy Prime Minister. Mrs. Hafiza and friends. Prof. Rajah has explained and how the project originated and what inspired the team to work together, and how he wrote in Tan Sri Kamal to be part of the project. He also persuaded me to join this, though I was a bit reluctant in the beginning. But what I find challenging and interesting in this project is not that its focus is not on biography, biographical because a number of books have been written, including one published by Bukit Press, a biography, Tun Razak by a number of writers, which is a good biography, detail and certain things that we don't know are in that book. But what I find the approach to write this book on the legacies of Tun Razak is challenging because of the ultimate intent is not just to document what he has done, but to reflect on what he has done and its relevance for today, not only for Malaysia of today, but also for other countries that have similar problems like what we faced in the last 50, 60 years. Now, in my chapter, I tried to be as reflective as possible and to synthesize the things, the ideas and the policies that Tun Razak undertook with respect to nation building and national unity. Now, in that chapter, I structured it into three parts. One is to look at the young Razak when he was a student in London. What impacted upon him that later on had implications or had influence upon the kind of policies and ideas that he undertook as a leader in the government. So that's the first part. The second part was on what he did. Ideas translated into action, into policies, education, NEP, and so on and so forth. And the third part, the lessons, the implications from what he did for us today, for Malaysia today, and also for other countries. So to just go over very quickly about what I wrote in the second chapter of the book, is that, well, like many others of that generation, Tun Razak was born in 1922. He died very young, at the age of 84 in 1976. And his early education was interrupted by the Second World War. But he was at Raffles, which I think was important because from Pahang, which had a very glorious tradition of anti-colonial struggles, Datuk Rahman, Makilau, and all that. I cannot find any evidence of the influence of that history, of Pahang history on him. But my guess is that it must have an influence on him and his family in terms of that semangat patriotisme, that patriotism, the love for the country, and the critical approach towards colonialism. I think coming from that, from Pahang is important because of that history. I think that's number one. But Pahang is very Malay, just like Jalan, where I come from. But being exposed to Raffles in Singapore is an important part of the history of his personal journey in the sense of exposure to other people, to people of other ethnic groups, to colleagues, new friends, and so on and so forth. He met Lee Kuan Yew there, he met Robert Bork there, who became, Robert Bork played a very important role economically and all that. I think that's what I found on reading, and I think those are important things. And then, at the age of 25, he got a scholarship to go to London to do law. But 1945, 46, 47, that era in Southeast Asia and Asia generally was the era of anti-colonialism. The fight for independence was everywhere. India, Indonesia, in Malaya, and London had no choice but to re-strategize. And that was the era that he was going to London. In Malaya then, 1945, 46, 47, Parti Kebangsaan Malaya was formed in October 1945. UMNO was formed in 1946, in May 1946. Putra AMCGA was already formed. proposing the People's Constitutional proposals, the contest with the British, with the Federation of Malaya proposals and all that. And that was the era that the young Razak was in then, you know, at age 24, 25, and he was traveling to London in a ship, bukan night flight, in a ship, and he stopped in India for 1 month. And why India? And India is very important because India was independent in 1947, but there was a problem. One is, of course, the anti-colonial struggle, the fight for independence. But the ethnic problem in India was serious. The religious strife was serious. The Hindus, the Christians, led to division and all that. And the important thing that I could discern from the text that I read was that it dawned upon him, yeah, kalau memang if we want to be independent, to get rid of the British, the various ethnic groups must unite. That's a lesson that the literature that I read, Razak learned that if we want to gain independence from Malaya, then the various ethnic groups, then we must find a way to unite the various ethnic groups. That's one. But, and he went on. And the other thing is that he was also influenced by the Indonesian struggle for independence against the Dutch. And he met a friend by the name of Des Alwi. And Des Alwi is very important because he was the adopted son of Sultan Syahrir Mahata, I can remember his name, the deputy president of Indonesia, Mahata, right? And why? Because during the confrontation of 1963-65, Tun Razak contacted Des Alwi, the secret, to solve diplomatic problems, to solve conflicts between countries. Network is very important. Personal friends are very important, and he used that. He contacted Des Alwi and started informal discussions and things of that sort that later on led towards the meeting at the top level with the deputy president of Indonesia, the prime minister of Indonesia, and all that. So I think this is the things that he developed during his early years, during the student days and all that. And then of course when in London itself, I think that was very important. His interactions and activities with the Fabian group, he was together in the setting of the Malayan Forum, the anti-colonial student movement there. His friends at Woking Sri, Maurice Baker and a number of others, and PJ Lim also there. He was also in Kesatuan Melayu United Kingdom, taking over from Tengku. Then was fighting with nationalism. But what was important was that from my reading of it and how I wrote here, that it opened up his minds. You know, being in London is a very cosmopolitan city, lots of ideas, lots of books, and lots of activities. Hyde Park was there every day. You can stand on the soapbox and give your lecture there, and he was there. So I think that those things are very important, especially to shape a young mind at that time. And of course, he came back in 1950 at the age of 28, right? And then he assumed very top positions as state secretary and then Menteri Besar and all that at the age of 53. So those days, assuming top leadership of the country, of the state, and the country started very young. These days are different, right? He became deputy prime minister at the age of 35. Think about that, 1957. So, but my point here is this: that before he assumed leadership positions either in Pahang or at the federal, he even became the deputy president of UMNO in 1951. I think it's about that. So I think the influence during the London days became is very important.
And the countryside was just not really accessible at that time. Not much roads, even schools. I think Rahman wrote in the other Tun Razak book with another author. On the Osman Ali edited book on Tun Razak. I think Rahman, raised a very interesting point that I never really knew, that there were very few secondary schools in the countryside at that time. So, anyway, so I think, so what he did was to basically get the point that I wanted to make about the last thing that I said was that because it was so, the countryside was isolated and poor and all that, so the cost of borrowing was very, very expensive actually. There was, this was what they call the middleman monopoly, right? And then it was because of not because the Chinese wanted to exploit the Malays, no, but because of the just the underdeveloped nature of the country. So borrowings were very expensive, and so he had to unlock that in order to increase the productivity of the smallholders, particularly. And this is why there was a proliferation, if you can say that, of agencies, particularly in the early 70s. You have, since of course, Felda came out earlier, but you have Rista, you have Majuikan that was mentioned, you have Dara, you have Muda, So it all. Yes, and Pharma came out at about the same time as I can remember the dates. So I think this was his most important contribution to the rural economy. He unlocked the potential of these, particularly the smallholders. And but of course, a lot of government mission. There was a lot of investment in government machinery, which today, of course, I think, just as an aside, I think, we had to have that scale of bureaucracy to unlock the rural economy. But of course, today we are so much industrialized, and I suspect that the size of the rural bureaucracy is just as huge or had expanded further, which we need to think about, of course. So anyway, and one of the results was that certainly, the infrastructure that were laid out particularly during his time, and all the agencies, I think they had a very important role in raising incomes and productivity. There were more subsidies for the rural sector. So all that, I think, contributed to the development of the economy. And if you were to look at just the poverty figures, it's quite clearly that a lot improved with these investments in the countryside. So, and therefore, we need to, Felda, of course, was established in 1956, so it was well before, in the 60s. So, but it was with Tun Razak became the Minister for Rural Development in 1959. So he changed the course of Felda, because before then Felda was basically meant for state governments. It was like a fund agency, on behalf of the states. Then it dished out money to the states so that they would develop land in their respective states. But he changed that course, and felt that because the states were not very forthcoming, they didn't have the resources, meaning human resources or the necessary bureaucracy and whatever else. So when he came in, he pushed for this, and we can see that Felda became a very efficient, very he moved the process of land development in a very different way, and as a result of which large-scale development of land helped improve just about more than 100,000 families, or about 1 million people. So that was his important contribution. And of course, this was to address the landers and the near-landers. And so from the background about the rural economy, then how Felda became a part of this process of developing the countryside. I also raised, I devoted a part where I think which is still very important and which we need to look forward, is about how Felda, while it tries to overcome the obstacles or limitations of the inheritance practices of the Malay community, particularly through the Group Settlement Act of 1960, where all settlers, where settlers could only pass their property or the property under Felda list to one heir. But this was subsequently amended to give it to 2 heirs. Although today all of them would have had, paid or had the title. Today there's still about I think about 20%, 12% who have not received titles. Their heirs have not received titles, and there are issues related to the payback. But in any case, I think because of through the provisions in the Group Settlement Act, and settlers cannot divide their property, of course, to mortgage and to the land that they have under Felda. So actually, in a sense, the settlers do not own the land, although they may have the title, because they only have usufructuary rights, meaning they can use the land, but that's all. They can't even mortgage the land. It's not their property to do anything with it. So on the one hand, I think this really helped a lot, because the Group Settlement Act was put in place also because the land administration in the peninsula was in dire straits. It was chaotic, as it was described by Tun Razak, because of the Second World War and because the administration of land was not looked into. So there was no way by which the government could, just give or develop large chunks of land and to give it to settlers. So today, one of the problems about, as I said, is land ownership. So one of the discontents of Felda settlers is that they do not own the land, and therefore they can't do very much except to work on it. They cannot mortgage the land. They cannot give it to, or they cannot divide or subdivide the land as they wish. So this is so even though incomes increase and all that, but they lack something. They are not. Although they are promised the title. But one of the things that happened, and which was fantastic consolation, I think, was that Felda set up a koperasi, and this koperasi, most of the members of this koperasi were the settlers, and they owned a big chunk of Felda holdings, and because of that, this was I think in 1995. So this koperasi had very large dividends. I think this was through. So I think that was so. We can of course now reflect, to say that that was very good, but we should have gone even more forward with this idea where we should convert their assets into shares, and that they would gain from the shares they own through the koperasi, and so they should move forward so that the koperasi would even invest more assets and give more dividends. But that was not to be, of course, because Felda was sold. The Felda holdings was taken. The assets were taken over by Felda Global Ventures, and this then left us with a situation where, apart from the other issues that emerged from Felda Global Ventures, which I didn't get or didn't even attempt to do, was that the pipeline for dividends for settlers was came to almost what do you call an early end. So that it was from 1995, then we got up till 2012, maybe 2012, I think. So because of that, therefore, I think the Felda settlers, I think we need to study what's happening now, particularly with land issues, and they don't have this pipeline of dividends. Providing houses for the second generation and all that, it's good, but there's a lot of money, and of course there was too much subsidy given. But I think so. Therefore, I think I raised the point about ownership, and ended up with this issue about the koperasi not being given a stake. It's something that we need to think about for the future of the settlers, or even not just the Felda settlers, because many of the the rural smallholders today, many of them are above 60. Even the Felda settlers, I think 1/3 of them is above 60. I can't remember, 1/3 or 2/3. 2/3. 2/3 of them are over 60. And there was even mention about some settlers who are in the 80s and still paying the debts to Felda because of the continuous need for loans to replant. But so the implication is that, and the smallholders, so we think that Felda settlers are slightly different because they got into a contract with Felda and so on and so forth, and they had to pay back and this and that, and they can have access to title but not real ownership. Look at Felkra, for instance. Felkra is very different, of course, because it's on land that is around the area. So the fringe, I don't know what you call it, fringe land alienation. Feltra settlers, Feltra, the smallholders in the Feltra ambient, also like, in a way, well, they are old, just as much as the Muda farmers are. Most of them are old. And to the, my guess is that a large percentage of these old farmers, they no longer work on the land, and I bet Rizda is no different. So they no longer operate their own land, and they rent it out to Feltra. And Feltra is the engine that's supposed to run the land owned by Feltra farmers. I'm sure Rizda is very much the same boat. So we need to therefore look at ownership in relation to the issues that we see today, or we have seen for many years in Kuala. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. When talking about Felda, I wonder what Tun Razak would have thought about the current Felda. Whether they have done his mission, or he still believes that it can deliver his mission. Anyway, thank you very much. The next chapter is actually on education, and there are two authors. One is Dr. Cheong and also Dr. Savaranamuthu. I think he wants to start first, right? Yeah. Keok first.
Yeah. Good morning. Actually, this chapter is co-authored by me and Selvaratnam. However, if you like the contents of the chapter, I'm quite happy to take all the credit, and Selva can take all the credit. Coming back to the chapter, I think our chapter is proof that that Kamal and Rajah did not write in our terms of reference that you must praise Tun Razak. So we have tried to provide a rather balanced account of his legacy in education. Now the question that we ask ourselves is, it is not just 50 years, it's more than half a century since this Razak report was written, and that basically defined our education system for a long time. What legacy can be now discussed of what it did from the time of the Razak report. Now this legacy is affected by a few things. One of which is that there have been subsequent reports, there have been subsequent acts and regulations that affected what he originally did. The University Colleges Act, all the way until the Private Universities Act. All these things have modified some of the things that he originally did. The second thing that affects his legacy is the fact that he's not just education minister, he was prime minister. And in prime minister, he's also known for a number of things, one of which was the new economic policy. Now the new economic policy and the Razak report basically had a lot of influence on the way the education system was implemented. So things like that affect what he originally intended. His legacy was partly affected by these things. But when he came out with the Razak report, he had very lofty ideals for Malaysia. He wanted to increase access to education for everybody. Number one, he wanted national unity. He wanted national identity. All these are built into his report. And I think in some of these things he achieved. Some of the things are still work in progress. So I mean, I think of his achievements, access to education is the most significant. When he started as Minister of Education, the education scene in Malaya was very, very different from what it is now. It was an elitist system. The best guys go to English schools. I mean, we are the product of Selva and I are the product of that system. The best kids go to English school. If you're not good, you go to Chinese schools and things like that. You know, and he transformed the system from an elitist system to a system for everybody, that everybody has access, regardless of whether they're rural, urban, whatever race. You know, so that is a major achievement that cannot be taken away from him, I think. In other matters, as we discussed in our chapter, there are things that get in the way that made it not entirely possible to achieve. I mean, but it's a very tall order. It's still on the way. The other thing that is important for us also is the thing that in some areas he achieved without intending to achieve it. So actually, some of the which achievements are unintended consequences. One which let me just end very quickly, because Selva may have other things to say. One of the things that happened here, you know, the broadened access to education. We went beyond the public education to private education. The growth of private education, you had not intended, but it's part of the process of increasing access, so that by about 2010, I think the private tertiary education is larger than public education. So one of these consequences that is created a sector that is so large that it catered to many kids who had no access if this was not open if access is only limited to public education. So in that sense, if you look at his legacy, you can actually look at three different things. First, what he achieved, which is phenomenal. I mean, the access to education is incredible. What he partially achieved, and what he achieved without intending to achieve it. So there are three different things that we can look at. Selva?
Thank you. I thought Kichak will do the talking and I will do the listening, but he seems to have passed it on. Well, education is a central feature of any country, and that drives human resource capital formation. And I think what is interesting is that Tun Razak saw this as education as a central feature of this country's education. So 1956 education report of the Razak report at called is not something, it has got antecedents. I think the two antecedents are the 1952 education enactment, which is a very comprehensive report that was introduced by Hussein Onsen and a chap called Thurasingam. And unfortunately, it's a very interesting and very comprehensive enactment, but unfortunately, English being the medium instruction, encompassing all the other languages into the system, and a universal type of education for the country. Unfortunately, it was aborted by the British because of the emergency. Then comes the very important World Bank report, 1954. The report, which also to some extent anchors on the provisions made by the 1952 Education Enactment. But the Razak report, which came in 1956, to some extent accommodated the vernacular education of the system. And I think what is important is that, as Kichak mentioned, education for all. Every child has the privilege to go into a public education system. One thing, fundamental thing that many people seem to forget is that though he wanted the national language to be the medium instruction eventually, but he made English a compulsory second language. And if you look at the whole question of the implementation of this policy, today we are in a dilemma. because if you look at the complete neglect of English as a second language, which compulsory second language, which, and also to credit to Hussein on, he too emphasized English to be a compulsory language in the schools. It's because of that we have faced the dilemma. The other thing that is important is that in terms of the Razak report, it provided education a huge momentum. So today we go to any part of this country, you see schools, primary schools, secondary schools, access to education became a universal feature. And today we find that the participant rate in the primary level is near 100. In the lower secondary, it's 90-odd%. In the secondary, upper secondary is also very near 90. You see? And this is a huge contribution the Razak report had made to education in this country. What is a very significant feature is that we have to critically assess, is this system now provides a quality education for the country's needs? You see, education is not something that only higher education can provide quality education. The schools must drive quality education to the top. And this is a dilemma this country is facing, I think, today. Secondly is that if you look at the Razak report, if you look at the Razak report, the budget report of 1969 or 70, which Razak, the NOC pushed through, and the NEP afterwards, it created a supply-driven higher education, forgetting that the most important thing is that the 1967 Higher Education Committee report, which emphasized science education and the creation of your University Science of Malaya, it is largely to come to a stage within 20 years where we are going to produce 60% science graduates, science and technology graduates, only 40% arts and humanities graduates and education. But we have far from achieved this. If you look at the figures, I think Rajah will testify to it, we are only producing less than 30% or even 23% people from science and technology education. But what is also thing is that how we correct this misnomer of this huge supply-driven system. And if you look at very significant feature is the new economic model of 2010, which critically reviewed the whole education system in this country and touched on the issues of quality education in terms of science and technology education, in terms of the brain drain. Number of critical issues was raised on this report, the 2010 report. I think it's one of the most significant reports in the recent years, and very little attention has been paid to it. You see? And the government hasn't implemented the recommendations of that report. You see? And if you look at the employment report of 2013, which is again a government report, where it critically reviews the unemployable graduates of this country. Really? And then if you look at the higher education blueprint of 2015 and the education blueprint of 2013, most of these things address some of these issues, but they don't address a very important issue that Tun Razak brought about in terms of national unity. You see, it sidelines these issues. So I think that what is important is that today, if we want to aspire to be a developed nation by 2030 now. Is it 2030? Yeah. Then I think we have to address the whole issue of education from primary right up to tertiary level, and which is what, and Tun Razak also in the NEP emphasized, in spite of the quota system, emphasized quality issues were emphasized in the NEP report, and this has been sidelined completely by the implementers of this policy. And the World Bank report has brought out some very criticism on our education policy in terms of teachers. We have talked about the Finnish report, we have talked about Singapore, but see, we don't seem to correct these issues. These are very critical issues. If this nation, and the 2010 report is a very important report, which says if there must be an inclusive form of education, this country can't afford to move away from that type of policy. And every school must be a choice school to every parent in this country. These are important issues which have been raised. And this is what the whole 1956 education Tun Razak report is all about. Despite the fact that we have moved away from it. Finally, I want to end up by saying one thing. He said, I had the experience of working in a number of countries because of this privilege, or the opportunity that was given to me in life. There is one report that is very significant, and I reviewed it in one of the in his journal. English is the gateway to knowledge, and English is the gateway to higher education, knowledge, and the possibility of employment in the 21st century. This is the knowledge report of India, and India, to its credit, in the Constitution makes English one of the national languages of the country. It's not that I'm not, national language is important, but Tun Razak's report of 1956 emphasizes the creation of a language institute. And in that, he suggests that language must be developed to encompass knowledge creation on that. If you look at Rajah's report on Korea, Korea is advanced the use of Korean to encompass the scientific community, to use time. Rajah would explain this. So for me, what's important is that if this country doesn't address the foundations laid by Tun Razak and others in education and move forward in terms of building high quality human resource for the development of this country, we are going to have problems. We will never achieve what we wanted. Thank you.
The issue that were raised by Tun Razak in 1956, after 60 years, more than 60 years, are still, we are still facing them, and these issues are still not resolved. A whole transformation of the education sector seems to be called for. Not just the issue of national unity, but the role of English and international communication and so on. I think it is quite an achievement and that early to anticipate some of the issues that we have faced, that we are still facing, that Tun Razak achieved. And I don't know whether the 1956 report needs to be revisited, whether the blueprint referred to that report or not. You seem to say that they are not, especially on the issue of nation building or national unity. But one area where there's a single achievement in terms of producing manpower, especially for the Bukit, which was the essence of the NEP to a certain extent, is in the MIER achievement, and maybe Khaeruddin and Tun Razak produced that chapter.
Rasiah.
In your blog, you are called the handsome one. You can have the answer.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
The literature is very interesting. You take the 100 top universities in the world, what is driving high quality education is diversity. I had the privilege of working with Ajit Patel, who was LSE Director General. We invited him to give the keynote address for the World Bank. Had a big meeting here. Rajah was involved with it. What did he say? When I went to see him in LSE, to invite him for this, to come and give the keynote address, which is a very significant keynote address, which is available for everybody. What did he say? The increase in fees by Thatcher is going to be a disadvantage to higher education in the United Kingdom, particularly to LSE. Why is LSE a forefront institution in the world? Is because we have 40-60% enrollment, 40% foreign students, 60%, and we enroll the best foreign students in this institution. And that is, this diversity helps us to enhance quality. Okay? And you take Harvard, you see the recent reports. It's the same. Okay? You may agree with me.
Ahmad disagrees.
Tun Sri Arshad Ayub, correct, bukan Tun Sri Rahman Arshad. Tun Sri. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Tun Sri, Dato Nizam, Tun Sri Aziz, fellow writers. Tun Sri Arshad is supposed to be with us actually, but I think I just got in the news that he has to attend another function at Ladang Mokis somewhere in Teluk Intan. If he turns up shortly, it's well and good, alhamdulillah. Otherwise, I have to take over. Because anyway, the chapter that we wrote, chapter 8, the role of MARA in the development of Bumi-Putra professionals. Before I forget, I need to mention someone who's here, Dr. Junaid Saham. He's my HAL alumnus. We used to be president of the HAL Alumni Association Malaysia. Thank you for being here. Dan juga ni YB, sahabat saya belakang. Okay. After hearing their summary or their rendition of their chapters, I noticed everybody's quiet. I think you must be tired, and the brain must be tired. So perhaps I'll try to make it short, sweet, and as usual, to also which Tun Sri Arshad always use in his speeches. I'll try and adopt the miniskirt principle. Short enough to attract your attention, long enough to cover the bare essentials. Now, but before that, before it goes off my mind, I said I called a friend just last night, and I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Don't disturb me." He said, "I am conducting aqua thermal test on ceramics and steel and plastic under what they call controlled conditions." So when I heard that, I said, "Wow!" I was very impressed. Then on further asking him, I actually found out that he was actually washing dishes under the supervision of his wife. Okay, now back to the serious stuff. Now, when we wrote the chapter on the role of MARA, actually not many people know that Tun Razak plays a very important role to MARA. I had a privilege of actually going through a very confidential report that was done when in 1992 when our present Prime Minister was also Prime Minister, and that was a review of what MARA had achieved then. Okay, And if you had a chance, I will not tell everything, because if I do that, then you won't buy the book. So I'll just share with you some of the sleazy parts. But the important thing was, to me, it's important. I started off with affirmative action program, and not many people know what is an affirmative action. Okay, and if you read today, you know, we now live in an age, in an era of post-truth and fake news. There are a lot of things being written about affirmative action, which is negative. In my mind, and I really wish, you know, that a lot of people after this, especially the young ones, Malaysians, to read the book, because affirmative action is actually a social re-engineering intervention. That is nothing new. Tun Razak and Rasiah too. And so I quickly gave examples, and I quoted Putu and to understand why you know, some of the things that I mentioned, why the policies were put in place, what was the reason the leaders before and even during that time were doing what they did, because they understood the social structure, the fabric of the nation. So so that's important, the affirmative action program. So once people understand, when the young people understand, then they will understand, because even today we hear a lot of negative things being said about MIER. But MIER as an institution has, like Felda, has contributed tremendously to this country, and it is still doing so. And it is also our wish that it will be further enhanced when people understand the background of why it was set up in the first place, to help reduce the gap, the inequality gap, which is the buzzword of economics today, inequality. Okay, now, not only did I quoted, or we quoted Putu, we also quoted what Azana said, and a few other writers, and then we went through and described what MIER has done, you know, what they have produced. I won't bore you with the statistical details, but there were also some things inside there that we wrote, we put there, which not anyone has the privilege to know. The most important to me is what Tun Razak said to Sri Arshad in one of the Magran meetings. Okay, in those days we had this Magran, and one of the things, and this is what Tun Razak said to Arshad. He's not here actually, but I'm sure I've said this many times with his presence. He's just smart and he corrected me. This is what Tun Razak said. Arshad, UKM is for us untuk memartabatkan memelihara dan memelihara bahasa Melayu. Okay, that's the role of UKM. Betul kan? Betul? Okay. Now, at ITM, he said, I want you to conduct all your programs in English, because 20 years down the road, I don't want, you know, our Malay boys and girls cannot utter a word of English. And he said this in the early 70s. It's in that book. So you see, he already saw that. And I think some of the things that's going on with our education system, the change in, you know, policy and all that, was nicely, crystallized by the chapter on education. And perhaps whoever is going to be the leaders, okay, and looking and running this country, should actually look back. But to me, I think history is important, especially economic history. It's important because that helps us to not repeat the mistake. What else did I miss? And we concluded by saying that MIER has a role to play. It has to readjust itself, adapt, align, so that they will not be bypassed, or so that they can move along with, you know, today the fashionable word is IR, you know, 4.0, okay, Industrial Revolution, whatever, you know, blah blah blah. Okay, and we missed out. I missed out. There was actually another thing that also should be included, which is the the IR 5.0, the Japanese version. Because in Japan, they're already now not just talking about industrial revolution, they're talking about how do humans, after having, get used to all the gadgets, become humans again. Look at society, and stuff like that. Because we have a tendency to forget. Okay. My last note, Tan Sri, before I pass back the microphone to you. Because you tahu lah bila pegang microphone ni kan, payah dia nak lepas. And then the idea starts coming up. Now, again, in one of the sessions, Dr. Junaid, remember at our HAL reunion recently, I told the panelists, we are so busy, looking at technology and stuff like that. Okay, but we forget that unawarely we are actually preparing our young, our toddlers, our children to be slaves of future robots. With that, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I pass you back to Tan Sri Kamal.
Thank you very much. For the sake of completeness, there are two authors who are not here, Jomo and Johan, Savaranamuthu. They wrote one on the NEP, the other on foreign policy. Perhaps I want to ask Rajah to just maybe round off that part.
Let me take this opportunity to also address 2 points before I come to that. The first is with regards to national policy on language. I see that it's important because I was myself a former district champion orator in Malaya, and also one who seriously believed in the struggles of Pak Sukarno, particularly dealing with how they framed the Dasasila and the Pancasila. Very scientific. In fact, we have an article I did with Miranda Risang Ayu, who is a law professor in Indonesia. Elements of it are very strong, which led to the transformation of the Indonesian language to become a scientific language. Although I often admire how our Anwar Ibrahim speaks, I don't think that sort of scientific transformation took place here. So I think it is not so much the language as such, because the Japanese transformed science education in Japanese, the Taiwanese in Mandarin, the Koreans in their own language. But I do believe that at this juncture, and like what Rustam Sani, I was part of his Jabatan Kuasa Negara Bangsa, we felt that there's no way we can transform this language anymore, because it's just like what our politicians do. Noam Chomsky's favorite phrase, they conceal more than they communicate. So whenever they say something, we know more often than not it's the opposite. So we do not think that sort of political will is around. The second point I think that's important is, in as much as the Koreans and Taiwanese learned from Felda, we made Felda a special chapter because it's seen as a model largely in Africa. Likewise, Semolundung began with learning from Felda, and then subsequently, even the Taiwanese example, it's just like our Sekolah Pintar. They actually advanced far more, Korea and Taiwan, they came to learn from us. I'm making this point because if you look at the Semolundung that was launched in Busan in 1972 by Pak Chung Hee, or the one by Taiwan, it had elements that totally detached even from those who write about Felda. Because they actually learned key things that they learned from that extracted, which is establishing a price, acquiring that to provide stability, and ensuring that there's connectivity with markets, including global markets. But what else did they do? They actually connected them like our Maradi, but beyond that, science parks, incubators. So if you go to Taiwan, you'll find a Pakistani species mango adapted, exported to the US. A farmer is involved in it. And he's actually making higher returns. The transformation of a village, which is documented in the chapters that we did, because we did the part to do with Rizda, with Felkram, and all other things, including Jenka, Daram, Mada, and all these things inside there. I think these elements, probably if Rajah had been around, then you would have seen the transformation. Instead of having universities focus on just big science, but make sure that they actually did something and to have averted our science parks from becoming Gajah Putih. which is what our science park will become. If you go, you will see complete detachment in that sort of sense. Coming back to these two chapters, I think Jomo focused on NEP. In fact, he chose the chapter after we had already taken the chapter. And his focus is really on the target set. And he provides tables and statistics on falling unemployment, restructuring of, including professionals hired ethnically, because that was an element too that was pursued, although there was tersirat too. There wasn't obvious in the rules, but they were pursuing that. Equity capital, which was under the Industrial Coordination Act, particularly after 1975, he was looking at those things. But at the same time, he also makes the point that Razak was blunt and straight. Tun Razak was blunt and straight in terms of achieving those goals. He didn't resort to, you know what, I seem to take the point when you say politicking. It seems to have become a bad word. So he wasn't engaged in those things. Statements made, achievement translated on the ground. That's what the Jomo mentions that. So Jomo even concludes by saying, today a whole lot of things are said, and they even connected with Tun Razak, even when they actually don't connect with him. He concludes that way. Now the chapter on Johan Savaranamuthu is also very interesting, because we were the first from the free world to visit China. Tun Razak did that, to open relations with China. Yeah, okay, I take his point. But that's how the whole thing is narrated in the chapter. So I have to represent him. Then, likewise, along with Tunku Rahman, we were the first to also condemn apartheid. South African apartheid, all are documented there. He builds the chapter towards Razak's role in Zone of neutrality, peace and neutrality, freedom and neutrality. And in fact, if we invoke that, we can actually build a very strong Asia. If we actually invoke what Razak began with. And in that sense, Johan saw from the period Razak was around, the build towards middle powership, taking on a role that he would refer to as normative. If we had international relations, we should not be like the US become imperialistic. We should take the role somewhat similar to Sweden and Canada, perhaps. That's establishing international relations in the interest of humanity. That's a sort of chapter he builds from Razak's own leadership in Malaysia. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you have heard everything from all the 12 chapters. 12 chapters.
Including introduction.
Including 12 chapters. Except my chapter, which is on Tun Razak's leadership and leadership style. I wrote that chapter almost, obviously any knowledge in personal terms except to receive a book prize in RMC from him personally. Other than that, I know him from his work, from his colleagues, and so on. So it was really difficult to write that chapter. But nonetheless, there are other biographies that were very excellent, including Osman Rani's book on Rana. This book is very special because it brings together various ideas and the evaluation of the man who's in fact a folk hero to all Malaysians, I think, in all different ages. But for my generation, for Aziz Rahman's generation, and Embong and so on, this man is really something very special, and it should, Aziz, be really put into some form of syllabus in the lower level schools. I don't know whether our history book identified enough the man who really is the architect of what we are now still facing, trying to find solutions in education, in economics, in politics, in foreign relations, that are still so relevant to the current setup, even though the context have changed with the internet and the media, social media playing a role, and so on. The relevance of this man strikes me as something very impressive that we should sort of pass on to various generations. For my generation, I think, and this is a message I would like to send to the younger generation. Tun Razak represents complete balance of very many even opposing things and able to resolve into those contradictions. and find a solution that could, if he had lived longer, if he had got the right people supporting him as he had at that time in the civil service, the leaders, the political leadership, the kind of sense of mission that he projects and brings people to sit around him. Contrasts very much with the previous era of Tun Razak, collegiality, nation as a happiness. I mean, he wants to create a happy nation kind of thing. Although the index of happiness now is one measure of a country's development. But Tun Razak is not talking about happiness. Tun Razak talks about and acts on concrete, real things, but put it and articulated in a consistent fashion. That brought everybody, even though his opponents, including the political opponents that he had to face with. The fact that he even established a national coalition of opposing parties is an example of how he could achieve some balance in contradictory forces. The issue of language, Malay and English, is contradictory, and we are looking for national identity through Malay language as a national instruction. He still kept in mind the importance of English for international communication, international relations, and the job market. He's also the fact that he is a man of action and a practical man, tries to solve practical problems, but he's not opposed to ideas. In my chapter, I said that he's a man of ideas. He's not afraid of ideas. Nowadays, people are so very afraid of ideas. I mean, they fear change, and the first thing to change is to adopt new ideas. And people now are so conservative, so afraid of making mistakes, they're not experiment enough, and therefore do not innovate. Tun Razak, therefore, is ahead of his times. For me, Tun Razak is practical and an excellent administrator in the sense of Cheong to Wong Shi Tong, and that he was to Rahman. But he was the quiet one that did all the substantive work, all the background negotiation, all the kind of reconciliations and so on. And the man Datuk was just the front man, so to speak. Of course, the symbol of independence and so on. So Tun Razak, the architect of the new economic policy, he already saw 60 years ago the importance of the economic restructuring you need to achieve national unity. But we're still struggling with that notion. In fact, it will probably worse. We have come back full circle to this thing. This is why at the end of it I asked him, what would have happened if he had lived longer? He went too soon. If he had implemented with those kind of strong civil service that he had, with an APU that is still considered expert, center of expertise in economics and so on, with the kind of civil service, he left a legacy of strong civil service structure. Not only a good policy, or a policy that is very important to the country, but also the system to implement it. And his directive number 1 still is a functioning concept to implement. But now the ICU, the EPU, the SOLU and all that, including all the other agencies, they have become degraded and no longer playing their role that is important. And this is why this new government, in implementing Vision 2030, has to re-establish the importance of the civil service. The civil service is not just the employer of last resort, and it has grown because it was creating the jobs for the universities that are producing unemployable graduates. So that's why the quality of the civil service has been going down as well. So this circle of mediocrity is one that has to be relooked in order to break this vicious cycle of mediocrity. Anyway, I concluded in that chapter the issue of what Brown talked about, the strong leader, the myth of the strong leader. Strength is not because of all the various, the issue of dominance in the pyramid. Tun Razak, in fact, reversed it. He reversed the pyramid. He is at the bottom, and he's serving a larger mass purpose. And the scholar's classification of and how he projects himself is not so much about himself as a leader, which is what is the central core of a strong leader, but the fact that he's concerned about his followers. And his followers are, in fact, not just the civil service, but not the people themselves. But the main distinction that I was very happy about, or to describe Tun Razak, is not so much that he's a charismatic leader. There are many charismatic leaders. Those are assignations by followers because of social status, reputation, or whatever. But the distinction that is key to me is the word presence. He distinguishes between presence and charisma. Presence is something deeper, something more fundamental, something very authentic, and not put on like most politicians put on things. So he is a genuine leader because he has presence. And the only other living person that has to me that is Mahathir. Mahathir also has presence. So that kind of qualities have been missing for a long time. And I wonder whether after Mahathir, whether we see another leader like that. I want to now call on you now to, after listening.
Maybe we should also mention he had a good, able supporter, colleague in Tun Dr. Ismail.
Tun Dr. Ismail is quite special. In fact, I had an interview with Taufik just then on who wrote the elected politician. That Tun Razak is both, I don't know whether you can confirm, is both a rival and with Tun Ismail, but they are also friends. And politically they are in the same mind and the same mission. Both of them have the same kind of mission for the nation. I think in our politicians have that in mind, or rather their own longevity. I want to open the discussion, maybe many inputs from those others, Halim, others, Junid, others. If you want to say anything to add to what they have been said, please. We have a bit of time before I call on Dato Nizam to launch. No.
Thank you for the excellent discourse. Very appropriate. The timing is correct. In the crisscross of politicking that's happening now. I look at Tun Razak beyond the persona of a politician per se, but I think we forgot one thing about his feudalism inclination. Tun Razak is one of the 4 chieftains of Pahang, orang kaya Indra Syabanda. If you notice the way he handles his politics in the earlier era, where feudalism was still rampant practice, was to go for Tunku Abdul Rahman to lead UMNO, and also for him to consider Tunku Ari Bendara, the other son of Sultan of Pahang, in the economic realm of business in Pahang. What I'm trying to say is the balancing act that Tun Razak had, very, very carefully trading the passage of politics and business and ideology, because Rahman forgot that he is also quite a leftist. Tun Razak, having been exposed to the Fabian Society in London, etc. And I think you should be more aware of that. But you forgot to mention that. You are muted about. But I mean, in this morning's discussion, there was no mention about Tun Razak being a leftist in thinking. You know, as a Fabian member of the Fabian Society in UK, and very strong-minded person, together with Lee Kuan Yew, etc., etc. At the same, and Tunku Abdul Rahman was there all this while, but it was never part of the total group. But when he came back to Malaysia, when Hussein what's his name? On Jaafar. When On Jaafar left, he seek another Putra Raja, Prince, in the name Tengku, because at 35 he would not be able to handle the leadership. But smart enough, which is a strategic thinking of Tun, he would go for Tunku Abdul Rahman, who is actually a man who loves the world, in sports cars, etc., to lead UMNO, a Malay-based party, and was accepted. And that saved the situation. And he's always been a loyal number 2. And did all the job, all the work. and Tengku will go for whatever he has to do. Whether it is winning the Melbourne Cup or whatever, that's Tengku, that's Tengku. And it's okay. And Tun is there to work. And a question of nation building, we missed a point where Rukun Negara actually was drawn from Pancasila. There's 5 Panca, 5 Sila Indonesia and 5 Rukun Malaysia are almost the same. We need that as an ideology because ideology was there in Malaysia but it's never articulated. So we try to articulate it, and I'm sure what Kamal said about the preamble, the constitution, etc., not highlighted, which is that is the basis of how the constitution came about, whether it is Wasiat Raja-Raja Melayu, whatever it is. But the spirit and the soul of our constitution was derived from a very strong preamble, which is not articulated, it's not part of the constitution. But Rukun Negara tried to do that and failed miserably. The process of nation building in this country, the process of creating our own identity of Malaysia, is not there. It's questioned. Everybody's questioning it. So much so we are still work in progress after 62 years of independence, and we need a strong approach, strong articulation. Whatever, whether it's a new Rukun Negara or whatever, or new constitution, new system of education, which we are now politicizing it very deeply. Good report, but the implementation is subject to a lot of politicking. So much so that it is neither here nor there, and we never have a core educational basis to create a nation building or to create a generation of Malaysia. So I think there's not more to be done. It's work in progress. As you said, we are going back to the first cycle of our process of development. So that is my initial remark. Thank you.
Your point basically also emphasizes the point that I made, that Kuala is a matter of balance.
Yes.
He's a feudal,
Yeah.
at least in a sense, but he's got Fabian in leftism, so he could balance it. He's also, there's an NEP, he said we are racist policy, but he's also a nationalist, so he balances between that ethnic content to the issue of nation building and so on. So I think this is something that must be passed on to the new generation. Anybody, Halim?
Only for the white edition already. He has been all these things, a lot of it.
It's quite rare, I think, to discuss Razak and relate it to the intellectual, social, and political environment of his time. And after hearing several panelists here talk about the environment of the time, how it affected him, now we can understand how the whole spectrum of his policies can be explained further. And now I would like to what would be the relevance of Razak's I would use doctrine, a colleague of mine used Razakism once upon a time, which was severely criticized. What relevance has Razak's ideas, visions on the present planning for the nation? For example, when 2 weeks ago we discussed the prosperity, the shared prosperity, and I think we ought to examine how much of Razak's, for example, his NEP, how did he arrive at NEP? When did he have the time to read on ascending the mountain? And when did he get the opportunity to think about one step backward and two steps forward by Lenin? And the term, he did not change the term. It was a Leninist term. Well, the difference is Lenin put NEP to temper the socialist economy, while Razak ingeniously reversed it in a market economy we have to have some socialist measures. And I think the panelists here, in addition to Razak's ideas, the panelists, for example, the late Ishaq Shari, together with Jomo, and the late Ishaq Shari with Rajah, they created, they proposed a new dimension of ethics into NEP. That was in 1984, and Rajah and Ishaq in 2000. Then you move further, Rahman in his inaugural speech, proposed a new conditions which could be adopted in the new 2030. And most
about his speech to the youth. I'm no youth sitting in Ban.
yes, that's an interesting point. In 1970 or 71, there was a move resolution, although it didn't get any approval, to change and Tan Sri Aziz can confirm this, to change the ideology of UMNO into national socialism. Now, where did they get that idea from? Yeah? And it's quite interesting. In 2013, Kamal himself wrote a very interesting forgotten paper. He seems to forget it. It's quite interesting how he repudiated market fundamentalism, which was quite a radical thing to do. And in his state, he introduced a new dimension to the economic, which is an Islamic universal principle. Thank you. It's just a commentary.
Anybody else? Unit,
No, I think not much to add, except to draw some conclusions from here. And I think in the light of the recent Congress on Marwah, Tun Razak did really do the real thing of raising the Marwah through improvisation of economy, restructuring of society, and basically introducing industrialization. And also, most importantly, I think, education. I was at the ceremony when Tun Razak laid the foundation for ITM. I was that time assistant to Sri Arshad Ayub. And there he gave the speech and said, look, we stand on the hill here. I hope one day all these factories here will have Malay accountants, Malay lawyers, and this kind of thing. So I thought he had the vision through education that you do this social re-engineering. So.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else before I call the end part of our meeting today? Are you all happy? That would be too. At this juncture, of course, at the book launch, we have,
The books are there.
several times the book by maybe pressing on a sphere and then the lights come out and the sound come on. But in MIER we started a new tradition, and that is that we just have a low-key, personal way of launching in this book, in this case this book. And so I would like to invite the third scion of the Tun Razak to do the officiating for us, and maybe give a bit of reflection on those.
Thank you. Tan Sri Kamal, Rasiah, Professors Cheong, Rahman, Khaeruddin, Ikmal, Salih. I was hoping to be like Selva, just here to listen and not to talk.
But you talk after that.
Yes. And Tan Sri Arshad Ayub, alias Rahman Arshad, was supposed to do the launch today, but he's got caught up somewhere, so I have to do the honors, unfortunately. In that respect, my launch would be shorter than Khaeruddin's skirt. First of all, I bring my best salam from my mother and from my siblings. We wish to thank everyone who was involved in the production of this book. The authors, Yayasan Cemerlang, Professor Hafizah, who worked very hard for this launch. I remember in one of the meetings we had for the launch, I prophetically said that if Barisan loses the general election, nobody will come to the launch. I was reprimanded by Dr. Jomo, I remember, who said, how can I think that? And that Tun Razak was, his achievements cannot be associated with, present circumstances or family members. And he was quite serious about his reprimand. I was quite taken aback. It was meant to be a joke, but he took it quite seriously. So I appreciated that, and I realized that I think we did make I made a mistake of trying to associate the launch and the production with what's happening in politics today. It had nothing to do with politics today. You can't take away the achievements 40 years ago. When we decided to do this book, we felt that it was timely after 40 years to have a review of the policies then, what is done for the last 40 years, the relevance today, and the relevance going forward. And I was very pleased, surprised and pleased at what Tan Sri has said, the relevance of many of his policies today. What I felt after reading the book and after today's discourse, I felt that he was my father, but he was a father to all Malaysians, a leader for all Malaysians, and a prime minister for all Malaysians. I'm hoping that we can go back to an era where we are not divided by race, religion, haves and have-nots, and go back to some of the happy times of the old previous generations. On that note, and with Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I am very pleased to officially launch the book Driving Development. Thank you very much.